She was wearing my wife's earrings, not copies. Not something that looked similar. The exact pair small, ivory teardrops set in brushed gold, that I had saved 11 weeks of a welder's wages to buy Lorraine on the morning we got married at a courthouse in downtown Detroit on a Tuesday in October, 38 years ago. Vanessa was sitting across from my son at my kitchen table, touching one of them absently while she talked, the way you touch something that belongs to you, and she smiled at Marcus over the rim of her coffee cup, and the kitchen smelled like the French toast I had made, and nobody in that room knew that my entire understanding of the last 2 years had just quietly collapsed. I said nothing. I smiled back. I asked if anyone wanted more coffee, but something cold moved through me that Sunday morning, and it never fully left. I want to tell you what happened. All of it. Because I spent a long time carrying this alone, turning it over in my hands in the dark, and I've learned that silence isn't loyalty. Sometimes silence is just the thing that lets damage keep spreading. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural ironworker and then a site foreman for a steel fabrication company out of Hamtramck until my left shoulder and a very persuasive early retirement package made the decision for me. I live in the same house on the east side of Detroit where my son Marcus grew up, the brick two-flat on Haverhill Street with the maple tree in the backyard and the rusted bracket still bolted to the trunk from the tire swing we hung when Marcus was 7. I never took it down. Some things you leave not because you've forgotten them, but because you've decided to keep them. Lorraine died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was the kind of woman who spent her last good week making sure everyone around her knew where the important documents were. That was Lorraine. Precise. Fiercely organized. Loving in a way that looked a lot like preparation. She used to say that caring for someone meant making sure they wouldn't be lost without you, and she spent her whole life proving she meant it. The pearl earrings lived in a small velvet box in the top drawer of the dresser in our bedroom. After she passed, I didn't move them. I didn't move much of anything in that room for the better part of a year. Grief has its own architecture. It fills spaces and you learn to move around it. Marcus met Vanessa about 14 months after his mother died. She was 37. He was 32. A marketing director at a mid-sized firm downtown, polished and quick, with the kind of presence that takes up more space than her actual body when she walks into a room. I noticed the way she looked around my house the first night Marcus brought her for dinner, not with wonder, not with interest, but with a quiet assessment, like someone taking inventory. I told myself I was being an overprotective father. I told myself that a lot over the next 2 years. They were married 18 months later. I stood next to my son at the altar and I smiled until my jaw ached because he looked at her the way I used to look at Lorraine, and that was enough to silence every instinct I had. I need to tell you about my brother Dennis before I go further, because Dennis is the reason all of this came apart the way it did, and because he deserves to be known. Dennis is 5 years older than me. He lives at a place called Millbrook Terrace in Ferndale, a small assisted living facility about 30 minutes from my house. He had a stroke 6 years ago that left his right side weakened and his speech slower than it used to be. His mind is completely intact. He will argue with you about Detroit Tigers lineup decisions for 45 minutes if you let him, and he will be right more often than you'd like to admit. He just needs a little more time to get the words out now. People who don't know him mistake that deliberateness for confusion. He is not confused. He has been my closest friend since I was 9 years old. After Lorraine died, Dennis was the one who called me every single night for 5 months. He couldn't drive to Detroit anymore, but he called. Just to check. Just to make sure I was still there. That is the kind of man he is. When Marcus and Vanessa married, they took over the supplemental support for Dennis's care. His Social Security covered the basics at Millbrook, but the physical therapy he needed 3 sessions a week for his right hand and right leg required a private contribution. So did the room with the actual window, the one that faces the courtyard garden instead of the loading dock. Marcus had offered before the wedding. Insisted, actually. Said Dennis was family and family got taken care of. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom when he said it because I didn't want him to see me cry. Vanessa handled their household finances. It made sense. She was organized, detail-oriented, and Marcus worked 60-hour weeks as a project manager for a construction firm. She managed the payments, the transfers, the paperwork. I told myself it was a practical arrangement. I believed that right up until the morning I saw my wife's earrings on her ears. That was February. By March, things I'd been choosing not to notice started to sharpen. Dennis mentioned, carefully, with obvious discomfort, that his physical therapy had been reduced. The facility had told him the private supplement payments had become irregular. He didn't want to cause problems. That was the phrase he used, slow, working through it. Walt, I don't want to cause problems. I told him there was probably a billing error. I told him I would fix it. I absolutely believed that when I said it. I called Vanessa that afternoon. She was warm, apologetic, blamed a payment processing glitch, said she'd take care of it right away. Her voice was smooth and certain, and I had no reason to doubt it. I had no reason yet. 2 weeks later, I was driving through Berkeley on my way to pick up a replacement faucet from the hardware store when I saw Vanessa's car in the parking lot of a restaurant called The Larder. It's the kind of place that has leather menus and $12 cocktails with seasonal herbs in them. I noticed the car because of the custom plate Marcus had ordered for her birthday, VDG style. I always thought it was a strange thing to put on a license plate, but Marcus thought she'd love it, and she had. I was going to keep driving. I want to be honest about that. I almost kept driving, but something made me pull into the lot. Lorraine's voice, maybe. The quiet, ferocious version she saved for the moments that actually mattered. I sat in my truck. I told myself I was being a paranoid, jealous old man. I told myself I would wait 10 minutes, and if nothing felt wrong, I'd go buy my faucet and never think about this again. She came out 40 minutes later. There was a man with her. Late 40s. Well-dressed, the kind of dress that looks effortless because it costs a great deal. He had his hand at the small of her back, and she leaned into it. Not the way you lean into a stranger. The way you lean into something you've leaned into 100 times before. He opened her car door. She touched his face just briefly, almost casual, the way you touch someone's face when their face belongs to you. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after they left. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't ready for anger. I was a 63-year-old widower holding something I desperately did not want to be true, turning it over and over, looking for another explanation. I want to be honest with you about what the next few days felt like. I didn't move fast. I didn't have a plan. I was a man sitting with a stone that shouldn't be there, trying to understand how it got there before I decided what to do with it. I thought about the earrings again, the way she'd worn them so easily, with no particular reverence, the way you wear something that belongs to you. I thought about Dennis saying he didn't want to cause problems. I thought about his right hand, the one that still fought him every morning. I drove to Millbrook Terrace on a Thursday, without telling anyone. Patricia, at the front desk, a kind woman who has worked there for years, lit up when she saw me. "Mr. Briggs, haven't seen you in a while. Dennis will be real glad." I carried that sentence heavier than she meant it. I spent an hour with Dennis. He was in good spirits, the way Dennis always is in good spirits, because that is simply who he is. He told me about a documentary on the construction of Hoover Dam and had detailed opinions about the engineering decisions, and I sat there loving him so much it was almost unbearable. Then I asked, quietly, about the therapy. He was still for a moment. He told me sessions had dropped from 3 per week to 1. The therapist had said the private funding was unreliable. Then he said something that stopped my heart completely. He said Marcus had called last month. Said he was sending something, a hand exercise device the therapist had recommended. Dennis looked down at his right hand, the one that still shook. "Never came," he said. Just those 2 words, but he said them with a patience that was worse than any anger. I thought about the cost of that device. I thought about the cost of a jacket worn by a man who opens restaurant doors. I kept my voice steady. I told Dennis I would look into the billing. He nodded and said, "I know you'll get it sorted, Walt. You always do." 60 years of faith in those words. 60 years of a little brother, trusting his big brother to fix things. That trust sat in my chest like a coal. On my way out, I stopped at the desk and asked Patricia, as casually as I could manage, to check the status of supplemental payments on Dennis's account. She looked at her screen. Then she looked again. Then she turned to me with the careful face of someone who wishes they had different news. The last consistent payment had been 8 months ago. 2 small irregular transfers since then, both well below the committed amount. 8 months of the gap quietly widening. I thanked her. I walked to my truck. I sat in the Millbrook Terrace parking lot and I did not start the engine for a long time. I thought about my son, my careful, hard-working son, coming home with construction dust on his boots, and complete faith in the life he thought he was building. I went back to Berkeley the following Tuesday. I needed to see it again. I needed to convert dread into something I could act on. I found a bench near the entrance of the shopping strip, and I sat there for nearly 2 hours. I was about to leave when I saw them come out of a home furnishing store, Vanessa, and the man from the restaurant. She was carrying a handled bag. He was carrying what looked like a large framed piece of art, the kind you hang above a fireplace in a home being carefully decorated for a life being built somewhere else. I followed them at a careful distance to the parking structure. An old ironworker understands geometry. I knew how to stay back and still see. Their vehicle was a dark gray SUV I didn't recognize. He loaded the art in the back with the ease of a man storing things in his own car. She straightened his collar. He caught her hand and held it against his chest for a moment. I raised my phone. My hand was completely steady, the way hands sometimes go steady when the body understands that emotion is not useful right now. I took 5 photographs. Faces clear. The intimacy unmistakable. The new SUV, the framed art, the shared life being assembled piece by piece. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table. I put my phone face up in front of me, and I sat with it for a very long time. 3 weeks before this, at a Sunday dinner, Vanessa had mentioned with a great deal of warmth that she wanted to help me sort through some of Lorraine's remaining belongings. She said I was holding on to things I didn't need anymore, and that she wanted to help me let go. She said it with her hand on Marcus's arm, and Marcus had looked at me with hopeful eyes, wanting me to accept the kindness. I had said, "That's very thoughtful, Vanessa." I had meant absolutely nothing friendly by it. I called Marcus that evening. He answered on the second ring, "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" I let a breath go slowly. I told him I'd been thinking about getting my estate paperwork properly updated. My attorney had been after me about it for months. I said I wanted both of them to come over the following Saturday, that there were some things needing family witnesses, just procedural, but it needed to be done right. There was a pause, a muffled exchange I wasn't meant to hear. Then Marcus, "Yeah, Dad, Saturday's fine. 6 o'clock work?" 6 o'clock, I said. "Thank you." I spent the next 4 days building the file. I called Millbrook Terrace and requested written documentation of the payment history. I called Marcus's company directly on a benefits question and learned, plainly, what his salary and package actually covered. I printed the photographs on my home printer and put them in a plain manila folder on my coffee table. Then I called Patricia and arranged something for the following Monday. Saturday arrived. The doorbell rang at 3 minutes past 6. Marcus looked the way he always looks after a long week, a little tired around the eyes, genuinely glad to see me. He pulled me into a hug, and I held on a moment longer than usual. Vanessa was beside him in a pale gray blouse, smiling graciously. Her eyes went directly to the folder on the coffee table before they came back to my face. She noticed that I noticed. The smile didn't move. She was very good. I asked them to sit. We settled in the living room, them on the couch, me in the armchair facing them, the folder on the table between us. I want you to feel the weight of this moment. 3 people in a room, 2 of whom know something is about to happen, and 1 who doesn't know yet that the ground beneath him is already different. I said I wanted to share a few things before we got to the paperwork. I told them Lorraine used to say that the real measure of a person is not what they do when people are watching. It's what they do when they think no one is. I said I'd been thinking about that quite a bit recently. "That's a beautiful thought, Walter," Vanessa said. "Smooth, warm, not a single tremor." I agreed. I said Lorraine had a lot of those. She also had a pair of pearl earrings, I said. Ivory drops in brushed gold. I bought them the morning of our wedding with 11 weeks of a welder's pay. "I noticed you wearing them in February." The smile stayed on Vanessa's face, but something behind it shifted, like a painting moved slightly off level. She said she would have wanted them appreciated. She would have wanted them asked for, I said, but we can come back to that. I opened the folder. I didn't take out estate documents. I took out the payment records from Millbrook Terrace and laid them on the table. Then I placed the photographs beside them. Vanessa and the man, the restaurant, the parking structure, the framed art being loaded into the gray SUV with the ease of people furnishing a shared home. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't leave room for anything else. Marcus leaned forward slowly. He looked at the photographs the way a man looks at something when he is still hoping for an explanation he hasn't thought of yet. "Dad? Who is that?" "That is where a portion of your salary has been going for the better part of a year," I said. I turned to the payment records. "This is your Uncle Dennis's account at Millbrook Terrace. The physical therapy he was receiving 3 times a week has been cut to once. The hand exerciser you told him you were sending." I sat with him, Marcus. He showed me his hand and told me he was still waiting for it. Marcus turned to look at his wife. "Vanessa, it's not what she started." "His right hand," I said, quietly, because quiet is worse than loud, and I needed every word to land. "Your son comes home with concrete dust on his work boots, and complete trust in his heart, and your uncle sits 30 minutes away in Ferndale waiting for a $40 device while someone carries framed art to a parking garage." Marcus stood up. His voice was low and controlled in the way of a man keeping something enormous from getting out. "Who is he?" It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a door that has been open for 2 years, finally being recognized as a door. Vanessa dropped the warmth. It left her face the way water leaves a glass, when you tip it all the way over completely, and at once. What was underneath was harder and more honest than anything I had seen from her in 3 years. "His name is Stephen," she said. "We've been together for almost 2 years. He has a life that doesn't involve spreadsheets and 90-hour work weeks, and sitting across from your father who has looked at me like a problem to be solved since the day we met." "The money," Marcus said. It was barely a sentence. She almost laughed. A short, sharp sound that had no humor in it at all. "The money you handed me to manage." "Yes, I managed it. You were so proud of yourself for providing, Marcus. You never once looked. It was remarkably easy to redirect." She paused. "I wanted a different life. I've wanted one for a long time, and I built it with what was available to me. That's not something I'm going to pretend to apologize for." Marcus said nothing. He stood very still in the center of my living room, and the stillness was the most painful thing I have ever witnessed in my son, because I knew that stillness. I wore it myself, standing in a corridor at Detroit Receiving Hospital, while a doctor used words I wasn't prepared for. I looked at my son standing inside that stillness, and I thought, this is what Vanessa actually cost him. Not the money, not the marriage. This, the specific weight of having trusted someone completely, and finding out the trust was fuel for something else entirely. "Get out," I said to Vanessa. I said it once quietly. "Leave my wife's earrings on the table." She reached up without a word, took them off, and set them on the coffee table next to the photographs. Then she walked to the front door, opened it, and closed it behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence you wish you'd never had to read. Marcus stood in the center of my living room for a long time. I did not fill the silence. Some silences have to be stood inside before they can be walked out of. Then he sat down on the couch and he put his face in his hands. I went and sat beside him, not touching, just there, the way a father is supposed to be there when the shape of his son's world has just been completely reorganized by the truth. He asked, after a while, how long I had known. I told him I had suspected longer than I wanted to admit. I told him I'd had proof for 3 weeks, and I had waited because I needed to be certain, and because I needed him to see it, not just hear it from me. He nodded slowly. He didn't go home that night. He took back his old room, the one with the small water stain on the ceiling shaped roughly like the state of Michigan, which we always meant to fix and never did. I heard him up at 2 in the morning. I came downstairs and made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked until almost 4. Not about Vanessa, about everything else, about his mother, about Dennis, about the bridge project in Columbus that Marcus was genuinely proud of and had never felt he could bring up because Vanessa had quietly made our relationship smaller over 3 years, and neither of us had fully registered it until that night. Let me say that again because I think it matters. She had made our relationship smaller, not with explosions or cruelty, with small, steady adjustments over time. A suggestion here that I needed space. A comment there about how Marcus was overwhelmed. The way you slowly reroute a river without anyone noticing until the old bed is dry. If you've ever been in a relationship or watched someone you love, be in one where you found yourself slowly becoming less present in each other's lives without being able to point to the exact moment it started, then you understand what I mean. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives gradually, dressed as consideration, dressed as practicality, dressed as the natural distance that grows between a father and a grown son who has his own life now. And by the time you name it, you've lost months, sometimes years. The divorce moved cleanly. Faced with financial records, photographs, and Marcus's attorney, Vanessa agreed to a settlement that accurately reflected what she had contributed versus what she had redirected. The process was not painless, but it was precise. Marcus got the house. She got less than she had planned on. It was over in 4 months. The Monday after that Saturday, I drove to Millbrook Terrace with my son. In the back of my truck, a box. Inside the box, the therapeutic hand exerciser, the occupational therapist at Millbrook, had recommended the best model they carried. Beside it, a heavyweight zip-up fleece jacket, because Dennis is always cold in winter and too proud to mention it. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped in brown paper, a framed photograph Dennis and Marcus and me at a 4th of July cookout the summer before Lorraine died. All three of us laughing at something just outside the frame that I genuinely cannot remember, but which must have been real, because the joy in that photograph is unmistakably honest. When Dennis saw Marcus walk through the door behind me, his face did something I am not going to try to fully describe. Some expressions resist language. He had been told by Vanessa, sometime in the previous year, that Marcus was under enormous stress and needed distance from family obligations for a while. Dennis had accepted this. He had missed his nephew for over a year and had never once said so to me, because he did not want to cause problems. Marcus knelt by Dennis's chair, eye level, a choice about respect. He said, "Uncle D, I'm sorry it took me this long. I didn't know, but I know now, and I'm not going anywhere." Dennis put his left hand, the strong one, on the back of Marcus's neck, the way he used to when Marcus was a boy. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, slowly and clearly, "You're here now, that's enough." I had to look out the window at the courtyard garden for a moment. I'm not ashamed to tell you that. We spent 2 hours there that afternoon, the three of us. Dennis wore the new jacket and declared it the finest garment in his possession. The hand exerciser received a thorough and formal evaluation and was pronounced acceptable. The photograph found its place on the windowsill, facing the rose bed that blooms every June and that Dennis monitors with tremendous proprietary satisfaction. Physical therapy went back to 3 sessions a week the following month. Marcus set up the payments himself automatic, directly. With a confirmation number he texted me the same day. Just 4 words. "It's done, Dad. Permanent." Marcus lives in his house alone now. It's quieter than he'd like. But he has dinner at my place on Wednesdays. He calls Dennis on Sunday mornings. Last month he told me he's been thinking about taking time off for the first time in 3 years, maybe driving up to Traverse City, maybe asking Dennis to come along in the facility transport van. Just the two of them and bad instant coffee, and the kind of conversation that happens when nobody is in a hurry and the water is doing most of the talking. I told him that sounded exactly right. Lorraine's earrings are back in the velvet box in my dresser drawer. I take them out sometimes, not out of grief, not anymore, but out of something quieter. Gratitude, maybe. For 38 years with a woman who understood the weight of things. For a son who has his mother's careful eyes and will, with time, learn to trust them again. For a brother who waited for us with patience and dignity and never once made us feel the cost of the delay. I spent my working life building infrastructure. Load-bearing structures. The kind of thing that holds the weight of ordinary life without ever being noticed. I used to think that was a metaphor for fatherhood, that you build the structure and step back and let the traffic pass over you without calling attention to yourself. I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes the structure needs to be inspected. Sometimes you have to walk out onto the span yourself, in the wind, and find the fracture before it finds you. Vanessa was not a monster. I want to be careful about that. She was a person who had decided, at some point, that her own wants were worth more than the damage they caused, and then built systems to support that decision without being accountable for it. She used my son's trust the way you use a resource you don't expect to have to replace, and she used the quiet, grinding reduction of his relationship with his family as a way to make sure no one was watching closely enough to notice. The specific action she took, redirecting money, meant for a disabled man's medical care to fund a secret life that was a choice. She made it repeatedly, over 8 months, and she knew exactly what she was doing. This story taught me that the people who mean to harm you rarely announce it. They make themselves indispensable first. They manage things you're too busy or too trusting to manage yourself. And they use your own love for the people in your life as the very thing that keeps you from looking too closely. The mistake most people make is assuming that love is enough to protect the people they love. It isn't. Love is the reason to protect them, but protection requires attention. It requires being willing to feel foolish for checking. It requires the willingness to pull into a parking lot when something doesn't feel right, even when you're almost certain you're wrong. Ask yourself this: is there someone in your life right now who has slowly become the person who manages things on everyone else's behalf, and who you have never once asked to account for what they're managing? Not out of suspicion, just out of love, just out of care. That question is worth sitting with. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever been in the position of watching someone you love trust a little too completely, or if you've been the person whose trust was treated like a resource, I hope you'll leave a comment. Drop a 1 if you think I handled the situation the right way. Drop a 2 if you think I should have gone to Marcus sooner. Drop a 3 if you've been through something similar, and there's a part of this story that landed somewhere personal. Tell me what city you're watching from, and what time it is there, because I read every single one of these, and they matter to me more than I can properly explain. And before you go, I want to ask you something, I mean genuinely. Have you ever had to protect someone you love from a person you couldn't yet prove was dangerous? How did you find the line between patience and action? How did you know when enough evidence was enough? I'd really like to know. If these stories mean something to you, if you care about family, about loyalty, about what we owe the people who love us over decades, I hope you'll subscribe. There are more stories to tell, and every one of them is about what love actually looks like when it costs something. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Detroit, Michigan to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.